Hello, my name's Dr. David Emanuel, and this is a supplemental lecture for the Old Testament literature class for autumn 2011 for Nyack College Manhattan campus. And in this screencast, we will be looking at two prophets, that of Ezekiel and Daniel. Ezekiel's the first of the two prophets we're going to look at in this presentation. And as I've titled it here, he is what we could call a priest of the exile. Let us first turn to the man Ezekiel himself and a few of the details concerning his life and exactly who he was. His name in Hebrew literally means God strengthens. In Hebrew, Yechazek El are the two parts of the name. Yechazek means to strengthen, and El is a reference to God. Without any real degree of certainty, we can apply this meaning of the name to his ministry. We're going to see a bit more of that a bit later on. But his task was very much a lonely one, as one who had to basically stand alone and preach against the false hopes of the exiles. In this function, he would very much have been a man dependent upon the strength that the Lord provides. As we've learned earlier, when we looked at the book of Kings, there were two waves of exiles taken from Israel in the days of Nebuchadnezzar. The first was in 605 BC and the second in 597. It was approximately 10 years later that the final and most devastating exile occurred that included the destruction of Judah and Jerusalem. The man Ezekiel was taken during the second exile, the one in 597, about 7 years after Daniel was taken, but we'll come to that a bit later on. Even though they were contemporaries, we can't say for sure that they actually knew each other or were especially familiar with each other's ministries. Ezekiel, just like Jeremiah, as I mentioned before, his contemporary, was a priest. Unlike Jeremiah, however, Ezekiel did not prophesy whilst in Judah, but instead he had a message and a ministry to the exiles in Babylon, so they were in fact a huge distance apart. Moreover, because of his connection with the priesthood, we see in his writings a clear reflection of priestly literature, that is, literature from the book of Leviticus. Chapter 20, verse 26, for example, which speaks of pronouncing people unclean, reflects one of the major themes of the book of Leviticus, as we saw, being clean and unclean. You can review your notes on that. But Ezekiel, anyway, in chapter 20, in various places as well, he continues to draw upon this priestly tradition, if you like, from earlier biblical literature. Ezekiel's primary message is that Jerusalem is about to fall, or was about to fall, and it was about to be totally destroyed by the Babylonians. He spoke this message to the exiles who were still living in the hope that Egypt was going to come to Judah's aid and rescue them and deliver the Israelites basically from the hand of the Babylonians, which would in turn lead to the return of the exiles. As mentioned before, Ezekiel very much represents a lone voice of doom and gloom that he must take to a large number of exiles who still believed that their redemption was near. With this in mind, we should also remember that much of the second half of the book of Ezekiel is dedicated to another message: Israel and Judah's restoration. That is, after the exile, there would be a time in which the nations would be restored back to their land. This aspect of the prophet's ministry must never be forgotten. It's not just one of death and destruction and negativity, if you like. There are also clear messages of hope and restoration. When reading through the book of Ezekiel, it's important to keep in mind three important aspects concerning the setting of the events that take place therein. The first is that the first half of the prophecy, first part of the book, if you like, is set at a time when the king of Judah, Zedekiah, was attempting to make an alliance with Egypt that would enable Judah to be delivered from the hands of the Babylonians, as I just mentioned. See particularly concerning this, Ezekiel 30, chapter 30, verses 20 to 25. This act, this attempted alliance, if you like, effectively was an act of rebellion against God and his prophets, who had urged the king to submit to the Babylonians in order to remain in the land. In addition to the king rebelling against God in this way, the people, the common Israelites and the priests and the high levels of society, were also rebelling against God via a series of heinous spiritual adulteries. Some of these can be are outlined in the book of Ezekiel in chapter 8. As mentioned previously, and definitely worth re-emphasizing, Ezekiel's audience, the Judean exiles in Babylon, were fully optimistic about their imminent deliverance. In their eyes, therefore, Ezekiel was very much a harbinger of doom. As you read through the book of Ezekiel, you'll come constantly across a number of phrases, themes if you like, that are repeated again and again. Two of them are mentioned here. The first is the Son of Man. Even though this title may be familiar to you, particularly from the New Testament, its use here in Ezekiel is not quite the same. In Ezekiel, God frequently uses the term to speak to and describe Ezekiel the man. He is called a son of man, most likely to emphasize his humanity and frailty. By emphasizing his frailty, the power of God is more clearly displayed in the prophet's life. It is not Ezekiel alone who prophesies with such conviction and power, because after all he's just flesh. Consequently, the living and almighty God must be at work in his life. This very much contradicts the view that we see in the New Testament, where Jesus uses the term almost as a messianic term to describe himself. The second expression frequently seen within the book is, "Then they will know that I am God," or similar variations. See, for example, chapter 13 verse 9, chapter 20 verse 44, chapter 28 verse 44. This recurring phrase serves as a constant reminder to those in the Israelite community who had forgotten or chosen not to consider the power and holiness of their God. God's purpose for the book is that once it is read and the signs mentioned within have come to pass, the readers will know exactly who he is. Unlike the book of Isaiah that we've already looked at earlier in the semester, the unity of Ezekiel is pretty much undisputed, or the authorship, should I say. No questions really arise that it was indeed Ezekiel who wrote all of the prophecies in the book. So let's turn now to look at the individual sections of the composition of the book itself, so we can have a better appreciation of it. Before reading any larger books, this is just as a reminder, it's always useful to have an understanding of the general structure. By breaking a larger reading task down in this way, the process of understanding the whole is much easier. And that's what I'm attempting to do now. So after you view this podcast and you begin to read the book alone for yourself, you'll have a much better idea of what's going on and where you stand in the larger scheme of things. The first 3 chapters basically describe Ezekiel's call and the commission to his ministry. Often in prophetic literature, at the start of a prophet's ministry, he usually experiences what we call a theophany of some description. And a theophany, if you remember this term, is the term used to describe God appearing in one form or another. And frequently we see this, these theophanies or these appearances of God at the beginning of a prophet's ministry, when he is actually commissioned. At the start of Isaiah's ministry, if you remember, he had a vision of heaven opening up and he had a glimpse of God's majesty. Additionally, at the start of Jeremiah's ministry, he is shown a series of visions and has a direct discourse with God. For Ezekiel, he has a vision of the divine presence in the form of a chariot. The vision of Ezekiel's chariot has caused a lot of stir, and from the description given from the book, it's very difficult to imagine what it really looked like. I've provided a number of images, 4 images here, but as part of your homework, you should take a look for other images of what this chariot may have looked like on the internet and try to match them up with the description within the book.